Nancy Guthrie's disappearance continues tonight. Neighbors say fear is still lingering in the area. Investigators say they're not ruling out the possibility that more than one person may be involved. Meantime, we're told the FBI is answering calls around the clock to 1-800-CALL-FBI tip line and reviewing submissions online. A reward of up to $100,000 from the agency remains in place for information leading to Nancy Guthrie's location or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. 88 Crime is also offering a reward now of $202,500. Monica Garcia joins us now live in the Catalina foothills with the very latest. And Monica, what is the latest today?
Sean, the latest is in regards to a Tucson couple who wishes to remain anonymous, who tells me that they have found two gloves less than a mile away from Nancy Guthrie's house, one appearing to have blood on it. And we did speak with them exclusively. And to give you an idea, where they found it is, again, less than a mile away from here, as soon as you pull out of this neighborhood right on Campbell Avenue. All of this happening, they tell us, on Wednesday at 10 p.m. The couple tells me they felt compelled to help because they live in the area. They say they decided to drive slowly down Campbell Avenue, searching with a lot of people who were searching back then, shining a bright flashlight out the car window. And that's when they say they saw what looked like a black glove on the side of the road. So they say it did not look ordinary.
Sure enough, it was a black glove in the desert, and we found another black glove within, 10 feet of that?
It also appeared to look like it had blood on it. There was two different colors, and the blood was more towards like the wrist side of the glove, and on the pointer finger it looked like it was ripped. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll call the sheriff's department, see what they do with it. And same thing, we were on the phone with them. They're like, we can't guarantee anybody will come out. You guys can go ahead and leave. We were like, oh my gosh, is this really happening? We're asking for help, we're helping, we're giving it. We're literally saying we found something and nobody's coming. So then we decided, well, let's just call 911.
All right, so after calling at 911, the couple tells me within minutes, investigators were out there on Campbell Avenue helping them out there. And they said that happened at 10 p.m. They did not leave after that questioning with those investigators till 2 a.m. So in the meantime, we also did reach out to the FBI. We have not heard from them regarding this, but we did just hear back from Sheriff Chris Nanos. I just spoke with him on the telephone about 10 minutes ago, and he tells me he can't confirm whether or not that those specific gloves did have blood on them and whether or not they are currently being reviewed as evidence. But he did say if it's something that 911 was called out and the investigators showed up and it was taken as evidence, he can't see why it was not. They were not sent for evidence. Live in the foothills, I'm Monica Garcia. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Monica. And investigators in the Nancy Guthrie case are still appealing to residents in the area tonight. They're asking for any videos or images of vehicles or anything suspicious looking in a specific radius within Campbell Avenue to Ina Road, as you see on the map there, to La Cholla and River Road. That is the radius. Investigators say they're looking for any leads, especially doorbell or surveillance video from the night of January 11th between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. and from January 31st to February 1st between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. They say no detail is too small, and even footage of passing cars could help them in their search. We have a link on our website, kvoa.com, where you can submit your video. Investigators just ask that you include your address and the date and time that video was captured. Once again, here is video of that suspect captured by the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's home that evening. And we've shown it to you many times, we know, but investigators say it has never been more important to share the description of that suspect. They say they believe it is a man between 5'9" and 5'10" tall. And you can see there right in the camera that person was wearing gloves and a ski mask. And that person was also carrying a black Ozark trail hiker pack and what appeared to be a gun at their waist. Now, if you have any information on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, you're asked to call 1-800-CALL.
1 minute ago, the unthinkable happened. In a tense, carefully worded press conference, federal officials acknowledged something that no one expected to hear. The narrative surrounding the Nancy Guthrie case, the one repeated for months across headlines, breaking news alerts, and national broadcasts, was built on what they now describe as incorrect early assumptions. One senior reporter in the room described the atmosphere as suffocating. Cameras were rolling, microphones were live, and then, almost casually, an official admitted that the original public explanation of events did not fully align with the evidence later obtained. The implication was chilling. The story the public believed may never have been the truth. And as that statement echoed across the country, one question began burning through communities, social media feeds, and living rooms everywhere. If it wasn't what they told us, then what really happened? To understand the weight of this moment, we need to rewind to the night everything changed. Nancy Guthrie wasn't someone who simply disappeared without warning. She had structure in her life. She had people who expected to hear from her. Friends described her as dependable. Neighbors said she kept to routines. Family members insisted she would never vanish voluntarily. The night she was reported missing was described as ordinary. No loud disturbances, no frantic phone calls, no dramatic last words. According to the initial timeline released by authorities, Nancy was last seen leaving her residence shortly after dusk. Her vehicle was later discovered parked in an area investigators called concerning. Her phone stopped transmitting location data within hours. By morning, law enforcement made it official: suspected abduction. The word hit like a thunderclap. Abduction meant danger. Abduction meant urgency. Abduction meant someone out there had taken her. Search teams mobilized immediately. Patrol cars canvassed neighborhoods. Federal agents joined local officers. Press briefings were frequent and confident. Authorities spoke about leads. They referenced digital evidence. They assured the public they were narrowing in on a suspect. And the community responded. Vigils filled public spaces. Volunteers searched wooded areas. Social media campaigns amplified Nancy's name across the country. Strangers followed every development like it was happening in their own backyard. But even in those early days, there were subtle inconsistencies. Why were certain surveillance clips never released? Why did officials avoid answering specific timeline questions? Why did the description of the suspected vehicle change twice within 48 hours? At the time, most people dismissed those details as part of an evolving investigation. That's what authorities said. After all, investigations evolve. But today's admission forces a different interpretation. Earlier this afternoon, federal officials announced a clarification update. It sounded procedural, routine, something minor. Reporters expected incremental updates, maybe new evidence, maybe a suspect announcement. Instead, they heard something else. An FBI spokesperson stated that the initial classification of the case as a kidnapping was based on circumstantial indicators that were later determined to be unreliable. Unreliable. The word hung in the air. If the foundation was unreliable, then everything built on top of it becomes unstable. Officials explained that certain pieces of evidence once believed to point to forced abduction were misinterpreted in the early hours. They would not elaborate on specifics. They would not confirm which evidence. They would not explain why those interpretations were shared publicly with such certainty. But what investigators discovered next shifted the entire tone of the case. Digital forensics reportedly revealed timeline discrepancies. Location data that once appeared to support the abduction theory now raises different questions. Communications previously described as suspicious may have been taken out of context. That's when everything changed. Because if Nancy was not abducted in the way the public was told, then what was the true sequence of events that night? Was someone protecting a different narrative? Was the urgency manufactured to push a particular direction? Or was this simply a catastrophic error made in the chaos of a missing persons case? Behind the scenes, sources suggest internal reviews began weeks ago. Analysts reportedly re-examined surveillance footage frame by frame. Forensic specialists reconstructed digital footprints down to the minute. Behavioral experts reassessed early witness statements. And quietly, the certainty began to erode. One source familiar with the review process described a gradual collapse of the original theory. Not overnight, not dramatic, but steady. First, a timestamp didn't align. Then, a vehicle sighting contradicted earlier assumptions. Then, a key witness account shifted under scrutiny. Each detail alone might have been insignificant. Together, they formed something else entirely. A possibility that the public had been led in the wrong direction from the start. But the most unsettling part isn't that investigators revised their theory. Investigations change. Evidence evolves. The unsettling part is the confidence with which the original version was delivered. Press conferences used definitive language. Officials spoke in absolutes. The word kidnapping was never framed as hypothetical. Now, months later, that certainty is being reframed as preliminary interpretation. And that revelation has ignited outrage. Community leaders are demanding transparency. Families of other missing persons cases are questioning whether similar assumptions were made elsewhere. Online forums are dissecting every past statement line by line. What exactly was misinterpreted? Who approved the messaging? And most importantly, why wasn't the public told sooner that the foundation of the case had shifted? As the press conference concluded, reporters pressed for direct answers. Was there ever concrete proof of abduction? Silence. Is Nancy Guthrie still considered the victim of a crime? We are reevaluating all possibilities, the spokesperson replied. Reevaluating all possibilities. That phrase has now replaced the certainty that once defined the investigation. And tonight, behind closed doors, investigators are reportedly examining scenarios that were previously dismissed. Scenarios that change everything. If the case was never what it seemed, then the truth may be far more complicated and far more disturbing than anyone imagined. This is only the beginning of what could become one of the most controversial investigative reversals in recent memory. The fallout was immediate. Within hours of the FBI's admission, internal documents began circulating among investigative journalists. Not full case files, not yet, but fragments, timeline summaries, evidence logs, redacted notes, and buried inside those pages were details that didn't match the story the public had memorized. One document in particular stood out. It referenced Nancy's vehicle, the same vehicle authorities originally described as abandoned under suspicious circumstances. According to the early narrative, the car's position and condition supported the abduction theory. It was framed as staging by a perpetrator attempting to mislead investigators. But in the internal review summary, the wording was different. Vehicle placement consistent with voluntary parking behavior. Voluntary. That single word has now ignited a firestorm. If the vehicle was not staged, then the premise of forced removal weakens, and if the premise weakens, the timeline fractures. Investigators had initially stated that Nancy's phone stopped transmitting abruptly, suggesting possible interference. But digital forensic notes now indicate the battery may have simply depleted. There were no confirmed signs of signal jamming, no confirmed signs of device tampering. But what investigators discovered next shifted the ground even further. A reanalysis of nearby surveillance cameras that had been publicly described as non-conclusive, reportedly captured movement earlier than originally stated. movement that suggests Nancy's timeline may have started unraveling before authorities believed anything was wrong. Why wasn't that disclosed? Why did the public receive a simplified version instead of the evolving complexity? That's when everything changed inside the investigation itself. Sources say an internal disagreement began forming weeks ago. Some analysts questioned the rigidity of the kidnapping narrative. Others reportedly warned that publicly walking it back would damage credibility and spark backlash. The pressure built quietly. Meanwhile, Nancy's family continued speaking publicly under the assumption that a stranger had taken her. They pleaded for information. They asked for tips about suspicious vehicles. They trusted the narrative they were given. And now that narrative is unstable. Another internal memo reportedly highlighted inconsistencies in a witness statement that had once been described as critical. The witness claimed to have seen a suspicious individual near the area where Nancy's vehicle was found. But upon closer review, time-stamped data from surrounding businesses didn't support that exact sequence of events. The sighting may have occurred earlier, or later, or perhaps it was never connected at all. If that witness account helped push the abduction theory forward, and if that account is now in doubt, then what else was built on uncertain ground? Community members are now asking whether investigative momentum overtook investigative caution. Did early assumptions shape the interpretation of later evidence? Did the desire to act quickly, to reassure the public, unintentionally narrow the scope too soon? Or was there something more deliberate behind the messaging? Because here's the detail that is raising the most eyebrows tonight. According to a source familiar with the forensic review, there was never definitive proof of a struggle at Nancy's residence. The early language suggesting disturbance indicators may have been based on ordinary environmental factors later determined to be non-criminal. In other words, signs that once sounded ominous may have been ordinary. And if there was no confirmed forced entry, no confirmed physical altercation, no confirmed third-party DNA at the scene, then the certainty collapses even further. But investigators aren't simply admitting uncertainty. They're quietly expanding the scope. Behind closed doors, analysts are now revisiting financial records, digital communications, and geolocation pings that were previously considered secondary. Patterns are being reassessed. Gaps are being re-examined. And perhaps most unsettling of all, alternative scenarios are being placed back on the table. Scenarios that were initially dismissed. Scenarios that do not involve an unknown kidnapper lurking in the shadows. That shift has sparked intense public reaction. Outside federal buildings tonight, demonstrators gathered holding signs demanding transparency. Public alert, every suspect profile. But forensic analysts reportedly discovered that one key data point, pulled from synced device activity, placed Nancy's movements nearly 40 minutes outside that critical window. 40 minutes earlier than the public was told. That discrepancy triggered an emergency internal meeting. According to sources, the room was divided. Some investigators argued the error was procedural, a misread sync delay. Others insisted it fundamentally undermined the abduction narrative. If Nancy's movements didn't align with the supposed moment of disappearance, then the case had been operating on a flawed foundation. That's when the pressure boiled over. Supervisors demanded a complete reconstruction of the timeline. Every call log, every GPS ping, every surveillance angle. When the reconstruction was complete, the conclusion was unavoidable. There had never been concrete, forensic proof of a forced kidnapping within the timeframe publicly announced. The certainty had been an interpretation, reinforced too quickly. And once that realization solidified, officials faced a choice: quietly adjust the theory or publicly admit the narrative was wrong. They chose admission. But the consequences were immediate. Nancy's family, who had spent months advocating under the assumption of abduction, were reportedly blindsided by the shift in language. Community leaders questioned why evolving doubts were not communicated earlier. Legal analysts began discussing whether public statements had crossed ethical lines by presenting assumptions as facts. Behind the scenes, investigators are now widening the lens. Financial activity is being re-examined. Digital correspondence once labeled irrelevant is being analyzed for tone and intent. Behavioral experts are revisiting personality profiles. Authorities are no longer limiting themselves to a single scenario. Voluntary disappearance. Foul play by someone known. A staged misdirection. Nothing is being ruled out. But here, the chilling reality. Correcting a narrative doesn't automatically reveal the truth. It simply exposes how fragile the original version was. And tonight, the public is left with more uncertainty than ever. Was this a rushed conclusion made under pressure? Was critical information withheld to maintain order? Or did investigators genuinely believe they were protecting the integrity of the search? What we do know is this: trust, once fractured, is difficult to repair. And in a case this emotional, this visible, and this controversial, credibility is everything. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The original theory has collapsed. The timeline has been rewritten. And the truth, whatever it is, feels further away than it did on day one. But this case is far from over. New evidence reviews are underway. Independent analysts are now requesting access to materials, and sources suggest additional clarifications may be coming in the days ahead. If you've been following this story, now is not the time to look away. What do you think really happened? Was this a catastrophic investigative error, or is there something deeper still waiting to surface? Drop your theories in the comments. Your perspective matters in cases like this. If you want continued updates as they break, make sure you hit like so this reaches more people, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're tracking every development, every correction, and every new revelation in real time. Because if the official story was only the beginning, the real truth may still be hiding in plain sight.